What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Hello, brave souls. Tonight's first story is called It Looks Like My Daughter Might Be a Murderer, written by feeling_sky_7775 from r/short scary stories. My daughter's boyfriend was found dead, buried in the woods near Boulder Park last Friday. Someone found his body after their bloodhound dug him up during a walk, stabbed 14 times, covered head to toe in bruises and wounds. Based on forensic evidence, they believe the murder to have taken place early Friday morning. The last text they found on his phone that day was to her, at approximately 2 a.m. On my way, but gotta meet my hookup at the park first. My daughter's boyfriend was despicable. A pothead without any career aspects. A sleazebag. He's cheated on her twice that I know of, probably more. When I saw her last, I overheard her talking on the phone with her best friend. She suspected he had cheated yet again. To be honest, I'm not mad that he's dead. Ever since she started dating him, she's withdrawn from us. She quit her high-paying job to spend more time with him. She's been asking us for money. She's better off without him. Except that now the police think that she did it. She does not have an alibi for that night. No way to prove where she was. My daughter has a temper. Everyone knows it. I have to admit, from an outsider's perspective, it looks bad for her. She was just brought into the station for questioning a couple hours ago. If I didn't know any better, I would be worried for her, but I am certain she didn't go to the park that night. What she doesn't know is that my wife and I are always watching over her. I put a tracker in her car when she was 16. We monitor her phone, we read her texts. We know where she is and what she's doing at all times. She wasn't at that park. I'm 100% sure that my daughter did not kill her boyfriend, but I can't tell the police this, because I know who did. My wife doesn't know that I put a tracker in her car too. She doesn't know that I woke up that night while she was gone. She doesn't know that I can see that her location at Boulder Park at 2:18 on Friday morning. Our next story is called I'm an Elite Zombie Hunter with Igor. This was the worst day of my life since the apocalypse. Written by J Group from r/NoSleep. At first, when the dead began to rise, there was panic, mayhem, everything we had seen in movies and television. It all came to pass. All governments were wiped out, every world leader killed and reanimated. The systems and structures that we all had come to rely on was revealed for the thin and fragile glass tower that it was, and it shattered into a million pieces and collapsed. It was total anarchy, at least for a little while. Small groups of survivors such as myself roamed the countryside for months, looking for shelter, setting up camps. That was how it started in the beginning. Hunter-gatherer types. We traveled around trying to find a place to call home for a little while, until the hordes of zombies began to form and cluster together, wiping out everything in their path. And then move on. But after a while, structures began to form. Systems. Organization from the chaos. Evenness from the entropy. I was within that elite group of disciplined warrior survivors from the very beginning. Those of us who had decided to make a change for the better, and to set up something to replace the nothing that currently existed. That was how Igor was formed. International Ghoul Hunters, Operation Roundtable. By that point, we had a few pilots who could take us around and bring us all together for face-to-face meetings when we had to. We had also managed to set up some kind of rudimentary internet again, that we could all use for the purpose of communication. It wasn't anything near as good as the original, of course, more akin to a BBS platform from the 1990s, but it was something. The Round Table, as we called it at first, was a loose organization of leaders from various nations who wanted to work collaboratively together to bring the world back to normal, and to deal with the superiors. The superiors were what we called the zombies who had started to evolve. They terrified all of us more than anything we had ever seen, and we knew if we didn't take them out, they would destroy us all. Every bit of progress we had made would be undone. Of course, every round table needs an Arthur, and we had one. Perhaps that was the reason why we named the organization what we did. I honestly don't remember. But it was he who brought us all together. Who knows if that is his real name or not, but it was all I ever knew him as. Of course, he was British to boot. I'm Canadian myself. We had Americans as well, Germans, French, Brazilians, Koreans, Australians, South Africans, and representatives from a dozen other countries. It was a big table. Arthur had agents planted all over the world, and I was one of them. We rooted out the Supremes and reported back to him with our findings. Then we would send backup as necessary to take them out before they could build too big of an army. Oh yeah, did I mention? The Supremes could telekinetically control entire hordes of zombies? Because that's the whole problem with them. You can't have people like that around in the zombie apocalypse. You just can't. It's not a good idea to let folks like that hang around. They're nothing but trouble. The guy I'm about to tell you about was no exception. It was a typical reconnaissance mission at first. We were in the downtown core of Toronto, the burnt-out husk of towering buildings all around us. The city of a couple million people was a hollow shell of its former self. No one would have dared go into that city at the beginning. But now it was a different story. The undead ghouls who had taken over there were few and far in between after years of hard times, and we could take care of them handily. At least so we thought. Want to go check out the old Rogers Center? Somebody said. I think it might have been Cassie. But then again, it could have been Stella. It doesn't matter. It was no one's fault. Sure, I said. If it had been a busier day, I would have said no. I was a leader after all. But it was quiet. We had barely run into any undead since that morning. It was like they were all hiding out somewhere. I missed going to the Blue Jays game, even if they never did win another one without Joe Carter. We walked up the long staircase off of Front Street, making our way towards the stadium. I had an image in my mind of going onto the field, picking up a bat, and hitting a ball with it. I imagined it sailing into the outfield, a major league home run. Usually, I was so mission-focused, but I was goofing off that day. Maybe I was just tired of the grind. I think maybe it was something else too, though. The glass doors were all smashed out, making it easy to get inside. There were a couple of zombies milling around the foyer, and we made quick work of them. Cassie drove her katana blade through an eyeball. Frank caved in a skull with a sledgehammer. Tom stood back, watching out for an unexpected ambush, ready to intervene with his crossbow if necessary. The security gates had been destroyed by looters, and we slipped past them easily. We made our way towards the playing field, and I was overwhelmed by nostalgia. Memories of going to see baseball against my wife, my family, my friends. It all came flooding back. My knees buckled from the emotion of it all. They were dead. Every last one of them. I would never see them again. I would never watch another baseball game. There would be no more picnics, beach outings, or family dinners for any of us. What was the point of it all? My team must have sensed my sudden melancholy because they stopped with me and actually said a few sympathetic words. "Hey man, you okay?" Frank asked. "Give him a minute. He's dealing with something. We've all got shit from our past that comes back sometimes." I shook my head, trying to get rid of the thoughts. It wasn't easy. "Let's go play some ball," I said, trying to smile and feeling it stretch fake across my face, like a too thin coat of paint attempting to conceal a worn and splintering facade. Frank wasn't buying it, but was nice enough to not say anything. He put his meaty arm around me, and the five of us went down the aisle towards the playing field. Tom was quiet as usual, keeping an eye out behind us for everyone looking to sneak up on us. Surprisingly enough, the dugout still contained a few baseball bats and balls, even a couple of gloves. It looked like the players had cleared out in a hurry, and no one had come back since. We went out onto the field, taking our impromptu positions, and I saw the nervous looks on everyone's face. It had been so quiet lately. but we knew how fast things could change. Still, we thought we could handle anything. Frank threw a pitch at the strike zone. It was a lob, and I managed to give it a good crack on the first swing. The ball went sailing into the air and towards left field. Cassie ran for it and grabbed it, throwing it back to the infield. Stella was playing catcher behind home plate, while Tom stood off to the side of the field in the stands, looking around, waiting for trouble. "Come on, Tom," I yelled. "It's no fun without another batter. If you come down, you can take a next swing." I thought he would say no. Tom was always the one who stayed off to the side while the rest of us had these brief moments of fun. The stoic bastard never wanted any part of it. But he surprised me, and he came down to the field, actually grinning for once. I handed him the bat, and he stood at the plate, waiting for the next pitch. The huge, empty Major League Baseball stadium was hauntingly quiet, our every movement echoing across the vast space around us. Frank threw the ball a couple more times before Tom managed to get a hit. The ball went far into center field, and Cassie went running for it. Tom made a dash for first base, then for second. Frank was out there yelling for Cassie to throw it to him at second, saying they would get him out there. That was when I saw them. I was speechless for a minute, and the ball almost hit me in the head when someone threw it into home plate after an error. They had all been focused on the play and didn't see what was happening around us. At all the entrances, all around the field, undead were filtering in like patrons just before a big game was about to start. They were coming down the aisles toward us from every direction. It took a minute for the others to notice. I was too dumbstruck to say anything. Our game stopped entirely when they saw me looking and noticed our dilemma. Everyone dropped their baseball mitts and ran for their weapons. But we knew it was hopeless. We knew we were doomed. There was clearly a superior here, in the stadium with us. He was commanding the undead that were surrounding us on all sides. That was the only way they could be so organized. They wandered onto the field lazily, without haste, only revealing their surprising hunger as they came close enough to smell our warmth and our sweat. Then they appeared suddenly ravenous, opening their mouths wide and snapping at us with unnatural speed. The ghouls went after poor Frank the worst. He was a huge man, about 6'10". The superior probably saw him and commanded them to go after him first. He swung his sledgehammer around at a giant arc, obliterating several zombie heads with one fell swoop. But there was a wolf among them. Wolves are what we call the fast ones. The ones who act slow at first with an attack with stunning speed and ingenuity. They're not superiors, but they're close. Ever hear the expression, like a wolf in sheep's clothing? That's why we call them that. Because you think they're normal ghouls, but then they surprise you and tear your throat out with their bare hands. The wolf jumped on Frank while his back was turned, swinging his hammer in a great arc around him. He landed on his back and began to tear at the muscles in his neck, ripping them apart while he screamed. As I was distracted by that, 4 zombies surrounded me, and I had to sidestep quickly to prevent myself from getting devoured. I quickly swung the black bat I was carrying and caught one upside the head, causing him to stagger backwards. He regained his balance almost instantly and came towards me. While I was momentarily focused on that, the other 3 came at me, as well as 6 more. We were quickly becoming outnumbered, and hundreds more were swarming in by the second. They were storming the field like an angry mob. Only this mob was intent on eating our flesh. The smell of all of them was horrifying, and the terror I felt overwhelming. All I could see was the rotten faces all around me, black teeth and eyeballs oozing pus. Their skin was gray and decaying, with gaps and tears showing exposed muscle and bone beneath. And the noise of them all, moaning and gurgling while they attacked us with a complete lack of emotion or self-awareness. I saw Cassie go down and her sword went flying into the air and landed near me. Hurrying over to it, I picked it up off the ground, knowing how much it meant to her. I wanted to keep it safe, even if it was only as a tribute to her. Her terrified and desperate screams rang out hollow across the field. That was when I vowed that I would get out of there, one way or another. The wolf zombie came running towards me and launched himself into the air. I drove the sword point into his eye as he did, and the momentum carried his head right through the steel, destroying his brain. At that moment, I realized all my friends were dead. The horde was zeroing in on me, with no one else in focus their efforts on. Big Frank the Tank stood tall among them, his eyes now red and full of hunger and hate. Cassie stood up next and stalked toward me, joining the crowd of undead as they approached. They attacked me without mercy, my friends and foe alike, as if we had never known each other. I fought like I had never fought before, and let me tell you, I'm known for my ability to get out of situations even as completely fucked up as this one. I slashed off zombies' faces with the katana, cutting heads off while spinning like a dervish and somersaulting through the air. I parried and thrusted, hacked and slashed, drove through their legs and climbed atop the crowd's shoulders, severing heads and bouncing upon the ones that stood there, jam-packed together, using them as planks to springboard to and fro while I did my dirty work. Necrotic hands grasped my legs all the while, tearing long and ragged gashes from my flesh, breaking off fingernails that remained lodged inside me. Eventually, the pile of corpses was staggeringly high. It filled the baseball field almost. But even I had my limits. My arms were filled with blood, heavy and clumsy after hours of defending myself from never-ending onslaught of undead. One of them was cunning and quick, a wolf probably. I thought I had them all beat, but he grabbed me and took me down, and that was it. I was finished, I assumed, as the crowd of them remaining came at me and descending upon me with salivating mouths and hungry eyes, their teeth bared and hands outstretched like greedy infants reaching for a teat. But the superior had other plans. He floated in through the air, descending among the crowd of them just as they were about to consume my flesh. "You, I will keep alive," he said. "You are strong, and I like strong people by my side. I will keep you as my scribe. You will write what will become the new history books, telling of my conquests, making it known for generations after that it was I who created this new world." Thanks? I wasn't really happy with this new arrangement he was imposing, but then again, I really wasn't in a position to argue. "Does that mean you aren't going to eat my brains?" "Precisely. We can't have the new scribe stumbling around, drooling all over the scrolls as he writes the history books, can we?" I was very relieved. He noticed that and made a little tisk noise. "Oh, I didn't mean for you to get too excited. I said I can't eat your brains. I didn't say anything about the rest of you." The undead looked at me with hungry eyes once again, now having obtained permission to enjoy a meal, albeit within a limited menu. "Only his lower extremities, please. He'll need those hands of his to write with. We wouldn't want that juicy brain to go to waste, now would we?" The pack of them closest to me began to pull strips of flesh off my body with their bare hands as I screamed. They drooled and slobbered as they feasted on my legs and feet until there was nothing left of them. The pain was unimaginable, the suffering. Well, it's pointless to talk about now. I have a new kind of suffering to deal with at this point in my life. Now I get to write about the new world as it is created, a horror playland for a demented psychopath who enjoys nothing more than torment and suffering. He controls them all now, the whole lot of them. I get dragged around like his publicist, putting out press releases that nobody can read but me and him, and I'm starting to get the feeling he's practically illiterate. I sure hope Igor is out there somewhere. If not, I'm really fucked. Our next story is called, "I think I might have witnessed the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, but no one believes me." Written by Yevra Yimris on r/nosleep. I work as an assistant to the county medical examiner in blank County, Kansas. This is just a fancy way of saying that I work the night shift in the morgue. The other night, a case came in that you are not going to believe. I mean, the cops didn't believe me, so why would you? My friend Bobby, an EMT, gave me the heads up while they were en route. It was about 11:30 p.m. I had been on shift for about 30 minutes, putting her about the examination room, when the radio crackled to life.
Unit 4, ME. You copy? Over?
ME, this is blank. Is that you, Bobby?
Yeah, I'm bringing you a doozy.
What do you got?
Teen involved in some kind of chemical accident.
Special preps?
Dunno, maybe a bucket. This guy has a bag of bloody bones.
Great. I'll put on heavy-duty gloves.
See you soon. Unit 4, over and out.
I busied myself prepping a gurney and heading down to the ER to greet the ambulance. I didn't have long to wait. They must not have been very far out when Bobby had called. They pulled up into the roundabout, and Bobby and Sheila jumped out of the cab and met me around the back of the vehicle. Bobby popped up to the back of the van, and the two of them slid out the gurney, dropped the wheels and lined it up with the one I'd brought from the hospital. Bobby nodded the bloody bag. Give me a hand with this. I moved to the other end, and we each grabbed and heaved. The bag was surprisingly light and flexible. There was a dull rattle as we set it on the other gurney. What the hell? I muttered. You're telling me, agreed Bobby. Not much left of this kid. A pile of bloody bones by the time we got there. What the hell happened? Kid was dicking around at the sinkhole over on blank. Cops say he was overcome by some corrosive gas. Never seen anything like it. I looked up at Bobby. He'd been an EMT for a long time and had seen just about everything. His face was pale and held my gaze rather than look down at the bloody bag. Sheila had already run into the lobby to get coffee for them. You okay? Bobby shrugged. Yeah, I'll be okay. Just can't shake this feeling Screw it, I'll be fine once I get some coffee in me. Bobby helped me wheel the gurney through the sliding ER doors. I checked in at the reception and filled out the required paperwork for a DOA. I said my goodbyes to Sheila and Bobby, and we parted ways. I whistled to myself tunelessly as I pushed the rolling bed down the long hall towards the staff elevator. As I waited in the empty hall, we remained a skeleton crew after 12 a.m. on weekdays. I noticed an odd smell, something like burning, rotting leaves. It had to be coming from the body, but usually these bags blocked out most of the smells, at least until they were opened. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, and I wheeled in my most recent client. I punched the button for the basement and waited impatiently as the old rumbling elevator took me down. The basement was as quiet as, well, a morgue, I suppose. I was usually the only one down here until housekeeping came through around 4. I was used to it though and enjoyed the solitude. I pushed the gurney into the exam room and up against the main table. I figured I'd do my best to get the body in order. I put it on ice to await Doc Corrigan's arrival in the morning for the autopsy. I put on a pair of heavy-duty latex gloves and unzipped the body bag. A nauseating bust of putrefied air escaped from the bag. The overwhelming stench of rotting flesh and burning leaves assaulted my nostrils. A smell that shouldn't be present in a fresh corpse. For the first time in my career as a morgue attendant, I almost regurgitated the cold-cut combo I'd had for supper. Somehow managing to regain control of my stomach contents, as the odor began to dissipate, I examined the body I had been given. Bobby had been accurate in his description. The body was little more than damp bones covered in streaks of blood and what might be half-dissolved muscle tissue and skin. The internal organs were completely missing unless some of the discolored streaks represented what was left of them. I removed the skull first. It dripped gore and I double-checked my gloves to make sure the remnants of the corrosive wasn't eating through them. They seemed fine. The skull was devoid of any features but for a small pool of gray liquid that might once have been a brain. I sat at the head of the table. As I turned back to the bag, I heard a creak and turned back to see the empty eye sockets of the skull staring directly at me. I nearly jumped out of my skin and went into full panic mode before I realized I had not affixed the screws that would hold it into place, and I had simply become unbalanced. Why the hell was I so jumpy? I realigned the skull and fixed the screws, secure in the knowledge it wouldn't move again, before turning back to the bag. The spine was surprisingly intact. It seemed to be held together by a dark, gummy substance running up the center that might have been the spinal cord. I laid the backbone on the table and attached to the skull with temporary elastic fasteners. As I turned back to the black bag, I realized I was humming Dem Bones. Now that the odor had dissipated, and I was over my initial shock, the project of reassembling the skeletal remains of the unfortunate teenager became a fascinating puzzle. I set to work in earnest, occasionally singing snatches of Dem Bones out loud. I worked diligently for almost 3 hours. I had retrieved every bone that was in the bag. Every bone, that is, except one. The left ulna was completely missing. Nowhere could I find it in the bag. I drained the liquid that remained in the bag into a gallon-sized glass jar. The multicolored goo filled the jar about 3/4 full. Still I could find no left ulna. Strange. It was completely unlike Bobby and Sheila to leave anything at the scene of an accident. But then again, usually the bodies were intact. I resolved to radio Bobby about it, but right now it was 3 a.m. Time for a smoke break and a can of soda. I unfolded a paper drape and pulled it up over the skeletal remains. I went upstairs and outside. I walked across the street to the 24-hour McDonald's, retrieving a half-pack full of Pall Malls from the hoodie pocket, shaking a cig loose, and pulling it free from pursed lips. I lit the cigarette and stood in the McDonald's parking lot, puffing my life away. I had to smoke at the Mickey D's parking lot because the hospital didn't allow smoking on the grounds. Yeah, I know these things are going to kill me, but bad habits are hard to break. I finished the cigarette, crushing the remnants beneath the ball of my foot, and went inside to purchase a Dr. Pepper, sipping on the soda. I started back across the street towards the hospital. I stopped in the middle of the crosswalk, halfway across the street. I had the overwhelming sense that something was watching me. I stood there frozen, not daring to look around. A honking car horn brought me out of it, and I hurried on across. Once back in the hospital, the sensation left me, and I shook myself. Weird. I hurried back down to the morgue exam room. I needed to put the skeleton back on ice before it started to smell in earnest. I threw open the door and flipped on the lights. I stopped short. The skeleton was sitting upright on the examination table. Its legs hung over the side. It's faced away from me, its hands resting on the table on either side. I froze again. What the fuck? Was this someone's idea of a joke? My heart damn near stopped. I glanced around the room, but no one else was there. I stuck my head back in the hall. "Ha ha, Ernest, you got me. Good one," I called, but there was no response. I looked back toward the skeleton and my breath caught in my throat. Something black and sinuous wove in and out and around the bones. It was the substance from the spine, spreading like a growth of dark ivy and long dark fingers. It clung to the bones and articulated the limbs. Suddenly, the skeleton jumped off the table, the bones of its heels clattering on the white tile of the exam room. I let out an involuntary gasp, and the thing that had been a teenage boy turned toward me. The first thing my paralyzed mind noticed was the empty eye sockets were filled with 2 balls of luminous green gas. Jesus fuck, what the fuck? I backpedaled the door and slammed it shut. Now what? I ran for the elevator and punched the button rapidly. I know that doesn't help, but I was very close to full-blown panic attack. I heard a pounding and scraping on the morgue door. It didn't seem the thing knew how to work a doorknob, but somehow I didn't think that would hold it long. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the elevator arrived. I jumped in and slammed the hand down on the closed door button, heart pounding. I hit the button for the first floor. I needed to notify security. I ran down the hall towards the security office, just off of emergency. I dodged an orderly and a nurse who both looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I burst in the office, startling Phil into dropping his styrofoam cup of coffee on the floor. Jesus blank, what the hell? Phil, something is loose in the morgue. What? He asked, dumbfounded as he got down to mop up the spilled coffee. Leave that, damn it. Come on, you gotta see it to believe it. I began pulling on his uniform sleeve. The slight, paunchy, middle-aged security guard got awkwardly to his feet. Okay, but if you're yanking my chain, I'll wrap you up in the side of the head. I sprinted back down the hall towards the elevator, much to the chagrin of the resident on duty. Phil followed after me at a sedated pace, but fortunately, he arrived about the same time as the elevator came. We go in and punch the button for a basement level, looking sidelong at Phil. You got your piece? He patted the holster that was half concealed by his belly. I've got it, won't need it, but I've got it. The elevator door opened and I darted a glance in both directions. When I caught sight of the morgue entrance, I paused. Oh shit, I muttered. What? Asked Phil, stepping into the hallway. The door to the morgue is open. So, you probably just didn't shut it all the way. He started down the hall towards the exam room. I followed a half a step behind, knowing full well that I closed that door and made sure it latched. Before I could stop him, Phil stepped into the exam room. God damn it, man! He roared, and I stepped into the room in time to see him slam a ham fist down on the table. You scare me half to death, spill my coffee, and leave me on a wild goose chase? He turned to glare at me, his brow wrinkled in an irritated scowl. There's no one here, fool! He was right. I looked around the exam room, and the skeleton was nowhere to be seen. There was barely any indication that we had ever been there. I indicated the empty body bag on the gurney. I swear to God, I saw what I saw. Do you really think Bobby and Sheila brought me an empty bag? Phil picked at the empty bag, wrinkling his nose with a slight, lingering smell. Then he turned toward me, narrowing his eyes. You high, boy? What? No! Besides, weed doesn't cause hallucinations. Somebody's pranking you. They probably already put the body in one of the cold chambers. He started walking that way, but I grabbed his arm. Wait! I had noticed something out of place. The door to Mrs. Wilkinson's chamber was slightly ajar. I know I didn't leave that drawer open. Nonsense, boy! Phil pulled my grasp and moved over to the cold chambers. Let's see what we got here. He yanked on the handle and slid out the door. He stumbled backwards, yammering nonsensically. Mrs. Wilkin was still on the slab, but she wasn't alone. Crouched atop her body, pressed in close, was a skeleton I had been examining only an hour ago. Its bony fingers were locked tight around the dead woman's neck. Tendrils of black ooze extended from their hands and snaked into the ears of the corpse. Even from where I stood, I could see that they pulsed rhythmically. A third, thicker tendril? Tube? Tentacle? Extruded from the mouth hole of the skeletal creature and buried itself in the stomach of the dead old woman. It too pulsed in a sucking motion. Phil was fumbling for his sidearm, but you can tell he wasn't used to pulling it. You know how in old movies, when they animated skeletons, they move in a blocky, clumsy manner? This thing didn't move like that at all. It leaped at Phil with cat-like grace, knocking him prone. Then it jumped again, clear over me on the exam table before bolting out the door. I helped Phil to his feet as he finally got his gun unholstered. His normally dark face looked 3 shades paler, and I'm pretty sure he'd gone green. He stared back and forth between old Lady Wilkinson and the door through which the creature had fled. What the hell was that? That, my friend, I said, shaking visibly, was the patient that Bobby and Sheila brought me this evening. Nah, said Phil, slowly regaining his composure. That was some kind of animal. Already his mind was doing that thing human minds do when faced with the impossible. I better go after it, make sure it doesn't hurt anybody. Before I could stop him, Phil was already heading out the door. He turned his head back as he left. Make sure you clean up in here and figure out what happened to these bones. Phil went hunting the animal, and I turned toward poor Mrs. Wilkinson. A cursory investigation implied her brains and gut had been liquefied. I'd leave a note for Dr. Corrigan so he could do an examination when he came in. There was no finding the missing bones. They were running about the hospital somewhere. I marked the jar of fluids I'd collected as unknown and put it in cold storage. That would have to be tested. It's all we had of the dead kid. I busied myself with the necessary paperwork and waited nervously for my shift to end. Phil returned just as my shift was ending. His gun was holstered and he looked flustered and out of breath. Lost it, he panted. Damn thing is fast. Whatever it is. Some kind of monkey, maybe. Think I saw it on the roof of the McDonald's across the street. He plopped himself down in a chair by the counter on one side of the exam room. Don't go anywhere. You and I are due downtown to make a statement to the police. You ever find the bones? You know, I didn't. I wish I could make him understand. Try as I might, I could not believe what I'd seen as was an animal. Creature must have run off with him. Something like that, I agreed. Did he eat much of the dead broad? Mrs. Wilkinson? No, not much. I couldn't believe I was having this conversation. That's good. At least. Come on, let's get this over with. I tried to tell the police the truth, but they didn't believe me. I eventually accepted their explanation that I must have fallen asleep when I woke up, saw the monkey, and confused it with a nightmare. It was the only way that they'd let me leave. But that's bullshit. I know what I saw. That creature, the walking, leaping nightmare of a skeleton, was out there. Somewhere. Our last story is actually the third part of this Aussie Bushranger series we've been reading for the last month or two, and it's just called Working as an Aussie Bushranger, Part 3, The Massacre. Written by Ranger 10123 from r/NoSleep. So, I'm pissed. For days I put up with having nothing to read. Literally days of being bored out of my mind. Shadowed by Lizzie and humiliated by Sydney's constant exploits. But I put up with it, not just out of the goodness of my heart, but because I knew that Davo was going to be coming down on Thursday with the monthly supply drop, and I'd get some new reading material. Plot twist, it didn't fucking happen. See, the park is a good few hours out of town, and before Lizzie, Gordon was the only one with a driving license and no psychopathic tendencies while behind the wheel. Looking at Sydney with that one. Seeing as he doesn't have the time to take the drive every couple of weeks, that fell to Dave. Dave, or as we've always called him, Davo, was the only local barmy enough to drive up here every month with some supplies. You know, food and whatnot. He's middle-aged, average height, white with a beer gut. A bit bogan, honestly, but he kept the racism to a minimum and was always nice enough to bring a few spare books for me whenever he came up. And now, of course, he's gone and got himself killed. It was the bunny imp that got him, based on the specific region that was missing from his body. The penis. The bunny imp ate his penis. It's weird because it's not a part of the actual legend. Bunny imps haunt billabongs, sure, and eat unsuspecting humans who draw too near, but there's nothing about them specifically aiming for male genitals. That's just our guy. Then again, who am I king-shaming? My dad has tentacles. Still though, we don't know why he went down to the billabong in the first place. It was a good hour's trek from where he left his car, abandoned in the middle of the road. The lyrebirds would have led him far from that, and definitely wouldn't have let the bunny imp steal their meal. And we can't imagine him going there by his own accord. His keys were still in the ignition, and he's a local. Even if he doesn't know it all, he knows enough to stay the hell out of their bushland. Anyway, the government authorities in charge of the cover-up, it's always more thorough when it's local, confiscated the supplies he was going to drop as evidence, including, of course, the books. That bloody bastard couldn't wait long enough to deliver the books before he went on his little suicidal hike, and I had been fuming for days. Since the others have to eat and all that, the locals roped the new guy into doing deliveries. His name is James and his family has just moved into town, so they didn't know just how dangerous this job would be. I want to feel bad for him, but I'll reserve my pity until I assess his book selection. Any John Green and I'll throw him to the Prime Minister's myself. He showed up on Saturday. We were expecting him, so Lizzie convinced Gordon to convince the rest of us to throw him a little welcome party in the souvenir shop. We set up the radio and dusted the shelves. We washed our uniforms and combed our hair. Ava had even put some lipstick on Roger the Redback, but Gordon convinced her that Lizzie wasn't ready for that yet, despite having been around for almost a week at that point. Nothing strange had yet to happen when she was watching. I mean, except for those 2 times when she died, but that doesn't really count. Point is, we decided it's better to ease her in for as long as we can, and a 6-foot-tall, sentient spider isn't the most subtle peculiarities. James showed up at 1 in the Arvo, his ute pulling up filled to the brim with canned goods that none of us liked. I looked at him, sizing him up. East Asian heritage, long cheekbones and slick back hair. Tall, too, almost the same height as Gordon, who rushed out to guide him inside before the 2 a.m. sun came out. That was where the rest of us greeted him. "Hi," I said. "Hey," he responded. He had a Melbourne accent. "What brings you here?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Seemed like a good job to ride through my gap year." "You look about 25 years old," I responded. Gordon put his face in his hands, so I guess it came off as rude. "Oops." James, unfazed, just shrugged. "Yeah," he said. "Well, sometimes gap years last longer than expected, like a few years or almost a decade." He shrugged again. "You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I never went to school. But James seemed cool and I wanted to fit in, so I just nodded along. I changed my mind about him when I asked about the books, though. Apparently none of the locals had thought to cue him in on the particular tradition, so he didn't bring any. He promised to bring some along next time, but I'd already decided that I hated him and retreated from the conversation to glare at a distance, behind the counter. The others all seemed to like him. Ava kept giggling at everything he said, wrapping her hair around her fingers suggestively. It was kind of cringe, I'll be honest, but none of us were going to point it out at her. She's just too nice. It's impossible to willingly upset her. Kind of makes it funny that she's the one of us with the highest kill count. Actually, that reminds me. I was going to tell you guys about that, wasn't I? Totally forgot. Here we go. So, This happened about 2 years ago. Ava had only just started working at the park and was the hot new thing, unlike Lizzie, who no one likes because she's uptight and annoying and almost maybe immortal. Ava was actually cool, and we all started to spend as much time with her as possible, to the point that arguments over who would patrol with her would sometimes get pretty ugly. See, Ava is a free spirit. She has bushy red hair and wears a pointed witch hat, speaks in dreamy tone like she's gotten her head in the clouds, and sometimes she steals teeth from bodies before we throw them into the pit and swallows them like Paranol tablets. It's pretty badass. She can also talk to nature, which we all thought was bullshit until the one time she ran into the knot platypus and didn't eat her eyes and tongue, as it had a penchant for doing. Just gave her a weird sort of nod and then melted back into the bush. The spurs of its back legs glinted in the harsh sunlight. Before Ava came, one of the many odd routines that we had to keep up while working was preparing the birthday parties. Now, don't get the wrong idea. We don't actually let children have their parties up here. That'd be fucked up. But even though our no party rules was very clear and the locals all knew enough to stay away regardless, on the 4th of every month we would always find ourselves preparing a child's birthday party. Whose party? We never knew. We didn't even know why or on whose order we were doing it. It just happened. We'd wake up on the 3rd and know that it was time to prepare, and what to prepare, and how to prepare it. They were always fairly typical Aussie birthday parties. Lamingtons, fairy bread, sausage rolls, and party pies, always either under or overcooked. Those store-bought cakes that every Aussie kid knows. You know, the ones from Kohl's, vanilla, chocolate, or caramel with lines of chocolate dribbled over the top. We never knew where any of it came from. Davo certainly never brought it with him, since we would have eaten it ourselves if he had. It all just showed up, and we all knew where it was. And then, there were the parties themselves. The adults, they didn't really matter. They were there, don't get me wrong, but they were background noise. An old white guy at the Barbie, for example, or a tired mom handing out lolly bags. You could only see them out of the corner of your eyes. The real centerpiece of the occasion was the children. It was never clear whose birthday it was, but it was always the same kids. We recognized all of them, even if it couldn't describe them. And they never aged past the squishy state after 5 years old, but before 10, even as the years passed. When Ava's first birthday party rolled around, the children were enthralled with her. They played with her hair, pulling it straight and watching it bounce back, and some of them stole her hat and passed it around between them. Ava bore all of them with a calm half-smile, far more composed than I would have been. She's cool like that. It was, all in all, going pretty well. Things started going downhill, though, once the birthday cake came out. Usually, as I said before, we'd use one of those coal cakes from this part. The kids loved them, and so did we. If we had to throw a party every month, you can be sure that we'd always help ourselves to a bit of the buffet. This time, though, we were surprised to find that Ava had something else in mind. See, when she heard that we were going to have a bunch of kids over, she was ecstatic. Ava loves kids, and she loves making them happy. So instead of relying on the usual cake, she decided we'd do something to make this particular party special. She baked her own. It was a marvel of a birthday cake. 3-tiered, the color of velvety mud, decorated with bright green leaves made of icing. It was a work of art, and the kids went insane over it. They practically trampled each other in effort to get the first slices, balancing them on napkins and poking each other with plastic forks. Needless to say, we were all very impressed, and as soon as the opportunity arose, Gordon went to retrieve his own slice. "What's it made of?" he asked, digging his plastic fork in and admiring its silky texture. "Oh, you know," Ava hummed absently, smiling with the children's excitement. "Just the usual. Eggs, butter, flour, sugar, vanilla extract. A little bit of arsenic, some cocoa powder." Gordon paused, his loaded fork hovering centimeters from his mouth. "Sorry, what was that last one?" "Cocoa powder?" No, the one before that." "Oh, arsenic. It's my mother's recipe." Gordon nodded slowly, lowering his fork and studying his slice with a new wariness. "Huh." Then the kids started dying. It was pretty ugly. You know, convulsing, crying, blood coming out from a wide variety of orifices. I won't get into details since the others all seemed pretty upset. None of them had eaten any yet, But apparently watching dozens of small children die horribly inspires some pretty negative emotions. I don't know why. It meant more leftovers for me after all, and I helped myself after they died. The cake was good. Ava's mother was onto something. The arsenic lent a nice, tangy aftertaste. We didn't have any more birthday parties after that. And that's the story. But before you go, I've got one more thing to talk about. I promised I'd keep you all up to date with everything happening currently, so I should mention that something weird had been going on, like even weirder than normal. It's been a pretty nice break from the monotony, if I'm going to be honest. See, since the last post, I've been missing moments, and not in the normal way, like with hot days. No, everyone else remembers, and they don't often last full days, just a few moments here and there. And when I come to, it's with a taste of ash on my tongue and black dirt under my fingernails. It's been getting worse. I honestly think I've lost a whole 2 days at this point. That's how long the others say I was gone for, at least. That's why this update has been a longer time coming from the last. But I haven't forgotten you all. I'm just dealing with it. It's just weird, you know? I'm not used to the weird stuff around me actually affecting me. That's all for now, though, I guess. Sorry to leave you on a bummer note. It's probably nothing. It usually is. See ya. Well, that's the end of the Aussie Bush Ranger series. He must have truly forgotten or completely lost his memory because this looks like the last story that he wrote. But I hope you enjoyed all the stories tonight. And remember to always face your fears.